And so may I now speak in the name of the living God, our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Please do be seated. There was once a bishop visiting a parish as a guest preacher. And as the service began, the bishop standing next to the vicar looked out at a very minimal congregation. And the bishop then asked the priest, "Did you advertise my visit at all, Father?" "No," replied the vicar. "I can't think how word got out." I'll leave that with you. Well, okay, to quote loosely this morning from our friends at Monty Python, now for something a little bit different. If I was to say to you that I am going to enable you to see Jesus, I guess you might have a number of reactions. You might firstly think that I'd gone even more mad than usual, and that is quite possibly the case. You might just think theologically, well, this is a Eucharist. We'll see Jesus in the bread and wine of the altar. And I think that would be a very fair answer. We might think slightly more ecclesiologically as the family of the church, knowing that, of course, when we turn and look at each other, we see Jesus there in each of us too. Well, this morning I'm thinking a bit more literally of right in front of our eyes. Kind of. I wonder if you remember those magic eye pictures that were all the rage a few years ago. I could never do them. I'd spend half an hour looking and squinting and then finding out that it was some sort of dancing rhinoceros, and I just couldn't see it at all. Well, this morning we haven't got a magic eye diagram, picture, but we've got something a little bit different. So I've asked Mary if, hopefully, if there isn't enough for one each, then hopefully you can share with one another. So we can just hand those out. I will just hand out a few here, if there's any more. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do in a minute, when we've all got, hopefully, sight of one, and you can technically share, but it's easier to have one. Okay. So this isn't a magic eye picture. At least I don't think so anyway. Just out of interest, has anyone come across this before? Okay. So you know what's coming. You're not allowed to look surprised. Okay? Right. Okay. So. Okay. Hand those along. And then Jan as well. Hang on. You see, oh me of little faith, I should have printed more. Hang on, I will come back. There you go. You're right. Okay. Thank you kindly. And, okay. Oh, thank you very much indeed. So, Mary has some spares. Okay. Abby, have you got one? You sure? So, what I'm going to ask you to do is to look at the picture. Actually, am I allowed one as well? Thank you. So it's that way up, okay? And I'm going to ask you, there are some dots kind of where a nose might be, okay? So I want you to stare at the dots for about 30 seconds now. So keep staring, and then in a minute, well, 30 seconds or so, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and just lift your head slightly. So I should have counted 30, although I'm not sure I can count that high. So we're staring at the 4 dots. I think it's around 30 seconds. So staring at those. And then in just a moment, okay, I reckon that's about 30 seconds. So then you close your eyes and just lift your head very slightly. Did you see that one? It's quite clever. So do devotionally, do take this away and continue to use it. So, anybody get that? And did it work? Yeah? Okay. Fabulous. Well, I did say I was going to try and get you to see Jesus this morning. And I'm really glad that worked, at least for some of you. Apologies if it didn't, but do keep trying during the rest of the sermon if you would like. Well, we've seen Jesus, so to speak, this morning. And of course, I think where Peter is concerned, hopefully he didn't have to rely on optical illusions to see Jesus. He had him there a bit like we've just had, up close and personal. Almost too close at times. As we know, Peter once said, "Get away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man," which is quite an understandable reaction. But I just wanted us this morning to spend a few minutes now reflecting on how Peter saw Jesus. And I think right from the beginning, Peter must have seen something in this charismatic young rabbi. The one who says to Peter, James and John, simply, "Follow me." 2 words. And they drop their nets and leave everything behind, and nothing is ever the same again. Now, I always like to think that Jesus has that twinkle in his eye, instead of him being the twinkle in our eye, if you like. Something that was undimmed by the immense loads he carried. And I think Peter saw that time and time again. It drew Peter to Jesus, as it draws so many others, and still does now, here, today. Jesus asks Peter to take a hike, climbing high into the clouds, where Peter sees Jesus transfigured in glowing white. Jesus calls us to see him on mountaintops too, and deep valleys and everything else in between. Jesus calls us to see him transfiguring churches, societies, and even ourselves, if only we will let him. Peter sees Jesus, yes, as his Lord and Master, the Son of the living God, and the one who can walk on water. Peter is definitely up for that, at least to begin with. But there's that flip side. When push comes to literal shove, Peter doesn't just forsake Jesus and desert him with all the others. As we know only too well, he denies even knowing him 3 times. I don't know whether you've ever heard it, but it's a bit like there was once a question in a police exam. A young police constable sat down and was given this question. I don't know whether you've heard this before. So, the exam says, you're on street patrol when an explosion occurs on a road nearby. You investigate and discover an overturned van beside a large crater. Both occupants of the van are injured and smell strongly of alcohol. The car is unlicensed, and you notice that the passenger is the wife of your chief inspector. A passing driver stops to offer assistance, and you immediately recognize him as a felon wanted for armed robbery. Suddenly, a man emerges from a nearby residence, shouting that the shock of the explosion has caused his pregnant wife to go into early labor. And at the same moment, you hear a cry for help from the nearby canal, where a pedestrian has been blown in by the explosion, and he can't swim. Describe in a few words what you would do and what you would prioritize. And our friend thought for a moment and simply wrote this: remove uniform and mingle with the crowd. Peter, if you like, saw Jesus and removed his uniform. And it's easy sometimes for us to do the same, even though we're always called to wear those priestly robes of righteousness. But the beauty of that is we also know that Peter is redeemed. And more than that even, Peter sees Jesus as the one who commissions. Peter sees Jesus as the one who has more faith in us than even we do in ourselves. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. Granted, that might seem just a few moments to be occasionally quite a wobbly rock at times, but it is there, a gift of Jesus, the Jesus who sees the potential in you and me and just longs for it to flourish. One day then, Peter looks up and sees Jesus, and the rest really is history. It's a history of faith that is still being written, still being witnessed to. And in seeing Jesus, Peter reminds us that the gospel itself is about human life and the presence of the living God. And the gospel is not addressed to those who have earned that privilege, but to those of us who need rescuing. The gospel is not just a handbook for success. It is a life belt. It is a human faith to which Peter witnesses. It is his faith and it is ours. Not necessarily heroic faith, but a possible faith. Not just effort, but human life, mine and yours. And I just want to finish with words from David Hoyle, who is Dean of Westminster Abbey. And this is a shameless plug, because David is coming here in a few months' time to give the annual Friends Lecture here in Repton. And he is just the best speaker, so please do come. It's at the end of October. But David Hoyle has an abbey that is dedicated to St. Peter, and he reflects at their patronal festival these words: what does it mean to be Peter's people today? It is the reminder that we are human, loved, redeemed, and here to become more and more like Jesus Christ, day after day after day. Amen.